one-room school, which we don't have anymore. And we had one teacher. She taught all of us. We'd have the old pot stove for our heat. And that was done by coal.
Now that stove had to be taken care of by the bigger boys. And they would get there early in the morning and start that stove up and have it going so it would heat the building up for when we had school.
And then when it was cold days, we gathered around the stove to keep warm, but we still got our education.
Woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
For African Americans in Delaware in the 1920s and 30s, their early education left an indelible mark. Faced with the prospect of attending poor schools, their lives were transformed in new buildings constructed by Pierre S. DuPont. The memory of these schools and the education they received remains fresh in the minds of this generation.
Oh, yes, that brings back memories. We had all outdoor toilets. We had a pump in one corner. We did not have running water at all. We had playground equipment, which usually wound up in swinging around the pole, and that's about all you got out of that.
The educational environment for African Americans changed completely in the 1920s. Pierre S. DuPont believed that the state's educational system was seriously flawed. He used $6 million of his own money to build schools throughout Delaware, including 89 schools for African Americans. Hundreds of African American school children wrote to P.S. DuPont.
Buttonwood Avenue, Newcastle, Delaware, October 30th, 1925. Mr. Pierre S. DuPont, Wilmington, Delaware. Dear Sir, we're celebrating DuPont Day. You have helped the colored people get fine schools, but we have not gotten any yet. We are hoping to get one by Christmas. The school we have now is in the Methodist Church in Buttonwood. It is not well built, and in the winter it is cold in there. I sincerely hope we shall get a new school soon. Yours truly, Sylvester Wolford.
Mr. Wolford, is this the house that you were raised in?
Yes, it is.
And I have to ask you about this tree.
The tree was here, but it's grown and grown and grown, but it was here when I first got here. At 3 years old.
What was it like going to school that was in a church?
Oh, it was just the same, only it was complicated. Moving the desk around and having a hot belly stove had to be moved every weekend. The chairs and desks had to be moved every weekend and replaced so we could replace it for the people to sit on Sunday. It was very complicated. And then it was very cold sometimes. And you couldn't get the heat going. But we had quite an experience being in a one-room building at a church. It was one-room school with 8 grades. The teacher had to teach all 8 grades.
They had to be some pretty talented teachers.
Oh, yeah, they got a big job and what I call a pat on the back.
DuPont built the new African American schools to the highest standards. Attendance increased dramatically, and attendance parades were held. Highly skilled teachers working in pleasant environments brought new excitement into the classroom, where children were not only taught academic skills, but life skills, and African American history and culture.
It was a brick school. Oh yeah, nice brick school. And according to our estimation of it, it was a very large school. It was only one room, but it was much larger than what we came from. It had windows on one side, all along, and nice light came in. We had a place in the back where students could do some work. And then we had a place out from the school. We had our furnace out there. So we were really equipped like we had never been equipped before. I mean, little country school that we were in, and then go into something like that was really something.
The African American community thanked P.S. DuPont through letters, poems, songs, and commemorative events. Leading African Americans formed the DuPont Testimonial Committee, and on the advice of W.E.B. Du Bois, commissioned noted Harlem Renaissance artist Edwin Harleston to paint P.S. DuPont's portrait.
The DuPonts not only built these schools, but it was through their influence that the state eventually, even though it was segregated, that the state eventually did what it was supposed to do for the citizens of all the state. And we must never forget the contribution that the DuPonts made in that area.
Do you remember the DuPont song that Mr. Colburn wrote?
Yes, I remember very well.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
I remember that he wrote the song and always had your group singing it. DuPont, DuPont, DuPont is the man. DuPont, DuPont, the best man in the land. He gave us schools and he gave us roads. He lifted our hearts with a great big load. DuPont,
We are proud of thee, and your name shall never be the same. Oh, great today has ever been wrought. We know that you have played your part. DuPont, DuPont, DuPont is the man.
After Pierre DuPont finished building the schools, talented and dedicated African American teachers turned them into first-rate educational institutions. Gladys Clark entered a DuPont school in 1925.
This school was great. Mr. Onthank, when we were learning long division, he would put a long division on the blackboard at 11:45. Our lunch hour didn't begin until 12 o'clock. But if you got that division correct, you could even go home for lunch, because we all walked home in those days. If you didn't get it, he kept you there until you learned it, which meant he denied himself his lunchtime. He was so concerned that we got what we were supposed to get. The teachers made great sacrifices for us.
Segregation, however, hampered the teachers' efforts.
What kinds of supplies did you have? Did you have paper and pencils?
Well, yes, we had supplies. But as far as the books, we never got new books. What would happen after the books had been used for maybe 3 or 4 years or maybe longer at the other schools, which we call the white schools, we would have to send, they didn't even deliver the books most of the time. The larger boys in the school would have to go over to the white schools and bring the books to Booker T. Washington. And many times, some of those books were not in too good a condition. So along with the books would come rolls of Scotch tape. And before we could start studying from the books, each student would have to go through the book and repair the pages that had been torn by the other students that had used them for so many years. And in the front of the book, you'd see lists of names of students that had used these books before you got them, which means that our information was always far behind what they were getting at the other schools. For instance, when they were reading about Lindbergh, we were still reading about the Wright brothers. That's how far behind we were. So it was a challenge, but I guess at that time, we didn't really realize how bad it was. But our teachers were very interested in our keeping the books nicely, even though they were old books. we had to make covers for them. We took brown paper bags and opened them up and Scotch tape and made covers for the books, put our names on the outside and put the title on the outside. And we cared for those books as if they were brand new books.
Everything we got in that school was secondhand. It was what the white schools threw away. From the books to the baseball bats to the baseballs, everything we had. That was discrimination. That's the way it was.
Now, I thought I remember you telling me you even got used pencils.
Yes, we did. They were already sharpened. Some of them would be very small. Very seldom were they long pencils that had not been sharpened. They'd come tied up in a string and be brought into the classrooms and circulated around.
I mean, that was the most amazing thing I'd ever heard, used pencils. That was
Well, everything was used that we had.
One of the most significant institutions in Delaware for African Americans was Howard High School. Built shortly after the Civil War, the original Howard High School became a center for African American education. Edwina B. Cruz, the first African American school principal in the state, ran Howard from 1875 until 1920. Under Cruz's leadership, Howard's education was based on the classical model, with all students taking Latin. This was balanced with extensive cultural activities, including literary societies, debating, and dramatic clubs, along with athletic teams. She recruited some of the nation's foremost African American educators. Alice Dunbar Nelson chaired the English department for more than 15 years. Dunbar Nelson was also the wife of noted poet Paul Laurence Dunbar. In 1928, when Pierre DuPont completed the state-of-the-art Howard High building, enrollment increased dramatically, and the curriculum grew to include both academic and vocational subjects. Howard High School became a pillar of the Black community. Marian Anderson, W.E.B. Du Bois, and other leading Black figures spoke in the school's auditorium. It was the only free African American high school in Delaware until the 1950s.
This is Sam Peterson. I'm a country boy, lived in Hockessin, Delaware. 1925, I decided I was going to go to Howard High School. We lived outside of the little burg of Hockessin, so we lived around about 2 miles from the train station. We had to walk those 2 miles and be there by 7:30 because the milk train came through, and that's when they picked us up. We got on that and rode into Wilmington at 16th and DuPont Street. We walked from there out Delaware Avenue, past Wilmington High School, on into Howard High School at 12th and Orange Street. And there's where we started our high school education.
I'm just looking at how well this is made. Tell me about this.
Mr. Whitten was one of my favorite teachers. Now, in his shop, he had me make a desk. And then after I did that, I made a chair to fit the desk. I remember how he made me make a mechanical drawing of this. He's had a lot of influence on me over my whole life.
I came to Howard High School in 1933. When I made my dresses in 12th grade, Mrs. Helen Anderson Webb was my sewing teacher. This is the dress that I wore for graduation, and we made it in her class, had to do all the buttons and everything. And also, this is the dress that we bought the material in Philadelphia and made for my senior prom. Mrs. Webb was very particular. Everything had to be done perfectly. If it wasn't, she'd rip it out, you'd have to do it all over again. But many of the girls in the class made their graduation dresses at that time. And she was an excellent, excellent sewing teacher.
My connection with Howard High School goes back many years. My father was a graduate of Howard High School in the class of 1904. When my mother graduated from college in Boston, Massachusetts, her first job was in Wilmington, Delaware. And so she came to Howard to teach English in the English department with a minor in music. She stayed there for many years and then went out on maternity leave, and this young lady knew her.
Yes, and I was very angry because she left with her maternity leave when she should have been teaching me.
All right. The mother also taught night school. She taught night school at Howard.
In those days, there were a lot of people who worked in the daytime, but who had not been able to go to school, so they didn't know how to read and write. So she asked the Board of Education if she couldn't use one of the schools to teach them at night, and they said, sure. So that's what she did. So they had everything. She decided that the elementary books were not for adults, so she used the Bible and newspapers, textbooks, and they learned that. And she thought they should have music, so they had all kinds of music.
In night school?
Oh, yeah. They gave cantatas. She had a student council so they could learn about elections and voting and so forth.
Prohibited from attending junior high and high schools reserved for whites, African American children often had to travel great distances to continue their education beyond the 6th grade. Howard High School, the only free black high school in the state, was over 100 miles from communities in southern Delaware.
You finished the Frankfurt School 9th grade. What did you do then?
Well, you only had two options. You got a job either on the farm or in some industry there, and it was limited industry, or you had to find a way to go to another school.
At the time that I started school, we had to be bused. There was a bus that came up from Delaware City. Mr. Earl Perry owned the little bus. He picked up the children in Delaware City and in Newcastle and in Buttonwood and a few students on Newcastle Avenue and took us to Howard High School.
11th grade, I rode a bus. My dad purchased a bus to transport youngsters from southern Sussex County to Millsboro, Delaware, where another person that had purchased a bus would take youngsters that he had picked up in Millsboro and the surrounding areas and take them to the Richard Allen School in Georgetown.
The thing that was so bad was the parents had to pay for their transportation for 3 months, and then the state would reimburse them. So many of the children in Delaware City that finished 8th grade there could not go to high school because they did not have the money to pay for 3 months transportation to get their money refunded. There were very few from Delaware City that were able to continue their education after 8th grade because of the cost of transportation.
That was a hardship. Some people couldn't afford it financially, and many people dropped out of school, talented people. We don't know how many of them became disillusioned and discouraged. It's frustrating to think of what happened during the days of segregation.
The 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, declared school segregation unconstitutional. Lewis L. Redding, who was part of the legal team that argued the Brown case, led this effort.
Along with a group of other early civil rights workers, with Lou Redding being one of the shining lights, we launched out in turning Wilmington around, and Delaware. We were just like gadflies, and we would go down to Dover and talk. We would go to the schools and picket, and we would talk to the principals, the superintendent of schools, until finally, I guess they got weary of seeing us. And then also, we had a great deal of help from the national office of the NAACP. They sent people down because they were used to negotiating. And so they helped us considerably also, until finally we broke through in victory. We still kept on because, as you know, they were wanting to do as little as possible. and we were determined that we would be equal.
Segregation is our enemy. It must be removed. Segregation is our enemy. It must be removed, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved.
In the era of desegregation, Black students began to attend schools with whites and had greater opportunities to attend high school.
Woke up this morning with my mind and it was
Some of the early DuPont schools continue to be used by a new generation of students.
stayed on freedom.
Others are being restored and rebuilt for new uses.
Stayed on freedom.
The bake sale is a fundraiser so we can restore the school. We'd love to keep it in the history of the school with us.
What is this to benefit?
The school here,
The
we're
school.
trying to restore.
Oh, this is that chimney that you said never comes down. It looks pretty strong.
Yes, it does.
Now, when did the school burn?
It burned on February the 1st, the first day of Black History in 1990.
1990.
A lot of us cried the night it got on fire. We loved the school. And so we just didn't want to see it leave the community.
This was one of the first schools that DuPont built for the Negro children. And 1922, he built it. Christiana 111C, that's the name of this one. There's something that we need to have this fundraiser to restore because it's something we have in the community for years, and we weren't even allowed to go to a school that we passed every day to come to school. We had to walk past that school to come to this school.
When you had the potbelly stove, where did you put the potbelly stove?
Right there where you see the hole coming through on the other side. The teacher was right in the front, and then the desks and all was behind.
Well, I can go back to my high school days when our slogan was making stepping stones from stumbling blocks. And we were determined to do that, and we did it. We succeeded.
Woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.